Hi guys, so I thought I'd actually just film a quick video on the basics of dieting, or the basics, well, not dieting as such, the basics of just diet, literally feeding your body properly, efficiently, and correctly. Now, a lot of people have a basic knowledge on what you need to include in your food sources and your diet and so on and so forth, but they might just need a little bit of tweaking. Some people don't know anything and just need a bit of guidance, and some people are probably, well, there's a lot of people, there's some, reasonable number of people out there who are more knowledgeable than me, but might not know the same things I know, right? We all got gaps in our knowledge. So basically, the foundations, and I always believe when you try to understand something, it's always best to first of all take the big picture, to step back and just look at the big picture. What are the basics of whatever you're thinking about? And with diet, you need to know the basics or the broad sort of topics that you need to cover. And then what I'll do is I'll do other videos on the more specific elements of the diet, very much more advanced. And they'll be a bit more boring, a bit drier as well, because it's just going to be reading notes that I make, But when it comes to diet, there are three main components of your diet. There are carbohydrates, which are sometimes known as sugars. There are fats, and there are proteins. Now, obviously, there are other things in the diet, the most important which is, of course, water. Okay? People don't remember that water is the most important part of your diet, actually. Now, very few of us actually drink tap water or mineral water, but water comes, obviously, from our food. If you have a wet kind of food. It also comes from, obviously, any fluid that we drink, be it pop, fruit juice, anything, all comes from that. So water is very important, and then obviously we've got vitamins and minerals. I've already filmed some videos on vitamins, but I'll release it after this video because I think this is more important to cover the basics. So what I'm going to look at today, a basic brief summary, very brief, very sort of all-encompassing. I'm not going to go into too much detail. I'm going to cover carbohydrates, fat, and protein. Okay, now basically when it comes to dieting, that is losing weight. Okay, so this is, or managing a healthy weight if you've already got it. You need to be able to maintain muscle mass whilst losing or keeping off excessive amounts of fat. Now you do need some fat on your body. And that's why, people look at bodybuilders in competitive state, which are possibly down to 3-4% body fat. They can only hold that really 2, 3, 4 days at most before they start to damage their bodies. They need to bring it back up. They only go into that condition sometimes for the day itself, and then possibly the day after, if they're doing a follow-up show. So, you get into that extreme levels is impossible on a long-term basis. You still need a healthy amount of fat on the body if you want to be healthy. Now, as soon as you drop it below the healthy level, the further below what is considered healthy for the body means you can be in it for a short period of time. If you're just a little bit below what's healthy, then you can probably maintain that almost permanently. You're not possibly going to be as energetic or supple as someone who's got a little bit more on them, but you'll still be okay. So basically, when it comes to dieting, you want to lose the weight or keep the weight off you, the excessive fat, but you still want to maintain muscle, okay? And that's where most people go wrong, okay? Now, what you look at is, for example, sugars, carbohydrates. There are actually two main types of carbohydrates in the diet. There are simple sugars, and these are the bad guys in most people's eyes, but they're actually essential to the diet. Every part of the diet exists for a reason, right? They're all there. It's just if you abuse one more than you do the other, or you abuse the bad ones by taking a lot in, you can make yourself diabetic, or you can put a pile on the weight and get really fat. So it's all taking things in moderation, in the amounts that they're supposed to be had, okay? But simple sugars are typically seen as the bad guys in dieting, okay? And these are the things that can cause diabetes, they can cause massive fat gains and stuff. So you do have to keep in moderation, but they're still very important. I'll get into that in a minute. And the other one is the complex carbohydrates. Now, complex carbohydrates, sometimes known as bulky carbohydrates or slow-release carbohydrates, are still carbohydrates. They are still sugars, but they don't taste sweet. Okay, that's the difference. Simple sugars taste very sweet, so it's a kind of table sugar essentially that you put into your tea or your coffee. It's simple sugars that make chocolate bars and sweets taste sweet. Candy tastes sweet because there's sugar in it. Simple sugars. Okay, it's what makes fruit actually taste sweet. Fruit is full of simple sugar. So you see, people don't realise fruit, which is considered very good for you, are full of simple sugars. So simple sugars can be good. You just, as I say, got to take them in what are considered natural levels. And what you find in a chocolate bar is way more than what you find in a piece of fruit, for example. So it's all about eating the amount that you would find if we were still Stone Age men and you're foraging your food, okay? And as I say, complex carbohydrates don't taste sweet at all. These are the kind of carbohydrates that you find in porridge oats, for example, and grains, in bread. They're full of sugars, but they're a different kind of sugar, so they taste completely different. Okay, so that's how you can sometimes tell the difference, okay? Now, simple sugars are important because these are sugars that, when you eat it, get pretty much into the bloodstream immediately, within 10 minutes or so, depending on how full your stomach is before you eat, okay? When you eat simple sugars, they go straight into the bloodstream and supply whatever is your metabolic process at the time immediately. So they keep the brain active, they supply the muscles. So simple sugars are very important when you start to feel a little groggy. We all get it from time to time. If we don't eat regularly, we start to get groggy, a little fuzzy in the mind. You have some simple sugars, bang, your mind suddenly switches back on. Now, that sort of get out of jail free card, of simple sugars only lasts for a short period of time. It's into the body quick, but it also gets out of the body quick. And that's the general principles of any biology. Things that happen quickly also end quickly. Okay, so it's a fast supply of energy, but it's also a fast loss of energy. So it's in the body and out the body quickly. Now, the reason why simple sugars are considered the bad guys is because they go into the body so quickly, they peak the blood sugars very high, very fast. And that causes a massive instant release of insulin. And it's actually the body that causes itself to become diabetic, not the sugar. The sugar doesn't make you diabetic. It causes you to release huge amounts of insulin very quickly. And the more insulin we release on a regular basis, the higher levels it reaches. Essentially, the body becomes tolerant to its own insulin. That's what happens. It releases so much insulin, it sort of breaks itself down. It just makes itself immune to insulin. Like, essentially, you become immune to a bug, like a bacteria or virus. Over time, if you're constantly peaking your insulin to very high amounts, eventually you probably will become diabetic, as I say, if you're eating simple sugars all the time as your primary source of energy. So that's why it tends to get the bad guy image. Also, as well as that, if you're relying on simple sugars all the time, you're going to have to eat them very, very regularly. Almost every sort of half an hour to 40 minutes. You're going to get hungry again very quickly. As I say, these are only to sort of supply your body with quick, immediate energy. And so you're going to have to be eating regularly, which means you're binge eating, essentially. And what happens is you only, need 10% of that sugar at any point in time that you're eating in a simple sugar to maintain your body. For those 10 minutes, it's in the body. So the 90% of the sugar that enters your body is kind of wasted. But the body doesn't waste it. The body is very good at hanging on to things, and it will take those sugars, and the body can transform sugars into fat. So if you're eating simple sugars very, very often, very regularly, because you're not including other dietary energy sources in your food, then basically 90% of that, or whatever percentage of it is, will be turned into fat. And that's why simple sugars can bloat you up. You see people who live off crisps and chocolate and things like this on a regular basis. They have that kind of bloated look, and that's why they have it. Okay. Now, complex carbohydrates are still sugars, as I say, but what they are is they're really big, bulky molecules. So sugars are essentially particles. They're essentially like molecules in their own way, but they're very, very small molecules of glucose. Okay. Now, complex carbohydrates are like not just one piece of glucose, but like 100 pieces of glucose all stuck together to form this really big lump of sugar, essentially. But because it's big, the body can't take it into the bloodstream. It has to be very small for the body to take in. So the body sees this big lump of sugar and sends enzymes to break it down in the stomach and in the guts. Okay, it breaks it down, but it has to break it off chip by chip. It's like miners with pickaxes. They just have to break the rock down chip by chip, and that's essentially what the body does. It breaks it down, and every time it breaks a piece off, it gets absorbed into the body and provides energy. But obviously this process takes quite a period of time, and so it will get smaller and smaller, this piece of sugar, until it's a simple piece of sugar itself. But over that time, it would have released its energy slowly, but in small amounts. As a result, if you're feeling groggy, or you're feeling tired, or you're getting a sort of, what's called hyperglycemia, that really sort of low sugar levels in your blood, you need simple sugars at that point. And say, for example, if you're training, You want simple sugars during your training or before your training and after your training to stop you getting tired and fatigued. But any other part of the time of the day, your primary source should be complex carbohydrates. And the reason is it stops you getting hungry. Okay? Because although it doesn't fix that grogginess quickly, it might take an hour to fix that kind of grogginess, right? So it's not going to fix it quickly. It will supply you with a very small, but a constant supply of energy for up to 2 to 3 hours, depending how bulky the carbohydrate is and how much you eat and what's in your stomach. There's a variety of factors. But you could get a continuous supply of energy for 2 to 3 hours. Small amounts of energy, but just about enough to survive. Now, some of it times might be just underneath your metabolic rate. So actually, you'll be burning fat, but you won't be feeling hungry. And that's the balance you need to get. You need to get it where your body's being supplied just about enough energy where it's healthy, but you're losing a bit of fat. And once you've lost that fat, you just bump up the energy just a little bit more, so then you're level. That's why mathematics comes into it, and it can be a little complicated. But the best way is just stand on a pair of scales and look in the mirror. And that will tell you whether you're eating the right amount or not. Okay? If you're losing weight, you're not eating enough. To maintain weight, because eventually once you get to the weight you need to maintain. So if you're still losing weight, you just need to up your diet just a little bit. If you're then gaining weight, you're eating a bit too much, you decrease the portions just a little bit. It's basic. It's not that difficult to do. Okay? And so complex carbohydrates are important, as I say, for a continuous long-term supply of small amounts of energy. Now, because even though they're supplying energy for a very long period of time, but because the sugar level is low, the insulin spike is actually low, so you don't become as easily diabetic on complex sugars. It's very hard, and if you eat huge quantities, so the levels all the way up here, in which case you become diabetic very quickly. But it's hard to eat that much grain. It's hard to eat that much rice, for example, isn't it? It's very, very difficult. Now, the other components of diet, as I say, are fat. Fat is actually very important. Again, this is the real bad guy, regards imaging. It's got very bad PR people working for it, isn't it? Fat, everyone hates it, the idea of it, but it's actually very important. A large part of our body is made up of fat. Our very cells that make us up, that's the smallest part of our body, essentially. The cells that make us up, the outside of the cell is made out of phospholipids, essentially. It's made out of fats. Okay, so we need fat to actually exist. It's an integral part of our physical structure, but we don't need huge amounts. Now, fat is basically all fat is a very, very high energy source, or very, very compact energy source, essentially. Highly energetic energy source. A gram of fat is worth about 3 to 4 grams, roughly 3 grams of carbohydrates. So you only need a third of the amount of fat for every 3 grams of carbohydrates. Okay, so if you found let's say lard, that's pure fat, right? If you were to get a lard, you would only need about 300 grams of lard to equal the same amount of energy as what is in a kilogram of sugar. That's how good it is at producing energy. Okay, and so and fat is basically an even bulkier version of complex carbohydrates. It's got no sugar in it. It is different, but it's incredibly bulky and hard to break down. So it's even slower release than complex carbohydrates are. It's a very slow release version of energy, but very high release energy. You only need to break a small amount of it down to get a huge amount of energy, and that's why we store fat on our bodies, around our belly, or wherever else on our body where we store fat. That's why we store fat. We don't. We store incredibly small amounts of sugar in our muscles and in our liver, but our primary backup energy source on our body for when we're not eating is fat, because you don't need a lot of it to keep the body running for a long period of time, so it's not bulky. And it's so easy to store for our bodies, and it's such a high energy release, as I say, and it can keep our bodies going and active for a very long period of time. That's why it's so hard to lose fat once you got it, because a gram of fat around your belly, which is not much, okay, that you won't even notice that if you lost a gram, okay, a gram of or a pound of fat around your belly, right, that's a huge amount of energy. That pound of fat will probably keep an entire human body running for hours and hours and hours, if not days. A pound of fat is a lot of energy, okay, huge amount of energy stored in it. Okay, so that's why it's so hard to lose weight once you've gained it, because the body also doesn't want to give it up. The body's thinking, hang on a minute, there might be a famine. There might be the crops might not work this winter. We might have to go the whole winter without really eating. And it's from our Stone Age period, when food was scarce. Our bodies don't like giving up the fat unless it has to, because it's backup supply. It's like a backup power generator, essentially. So fat is important in the diet, because it will give you a lot of calories. If you're not eating a lot of sugars because you're dieting, you will need to eat perhaps just a little bit more fat to make sure that your overall calorie intake, for example, while you're sleeping for 8 hours during the day, we all sleep for 8 hours. That means we're fasting for 8 hours every day. That's quite a long time. Okay, our metabolic rate's low when we're sleeping, but it's a long time of the day to go without eating. And so our body will be living off the fat during our sleep, typically. Okay, because there'll be no sugar left in the blood by the end of the night, So we do need fat in our diet, and fat's important for a lot of metabolic processes as well, but we don't need a huge amount. I think the average amount for a average male is about 90 grams or 60 grams a day, depending on your body type and that. You can check them out on Wikipedia. Sometimes they change, and you can work it out for your weight anyway. There'll be formulations out there if you check it out. But we don't need a huge amount, not that much at all. But we do need it. And the best sources of fat, in my opinion, are either animal fats, because they are so high in energy, but small amounts. But typically nuts. Nuts have a lot of fat in them, but sort of non-animal fats. And so they're not going to cause your cholesterol to go very high. So that's just an idea. Protein is probably one of the most important elements of our diet that people abuse. They either take too much, in which case the body has no real way of storing protein, other than making muscle. But making muscle takes a long period of time. All that happens is when you eat too much protein, the body converts it into fat. The body converts everything that it's got too much of, turns sugar, and it turns protein into fat if it's got too much of it, or it just pees it out if it can. If it can't create it into fat quick enough, it will just pee it out. Or poo it out, but typically pee it out. So as a result, protein, you don't really want to be taking too much of it, because you're actually going to make yourself fat. It's contradictory. You think protein makes you big and muscular, as a result might make you ripped. It doesn't. If you take too much of it, it actually makes you fat, believe it or not. So you want to be taking just the right amount. But if you're taking too little, it's a very hard one to balance protein. If you're taking too little, you're going to break down your muscles. Now, the body does not break down muscle unless you are screwed. The body does not like eating away its own muscles, because it will always go to the fat stores first. It will always go to your glycogen stores. The body will resist using your muscle as protein. So if you're starting to get muscle wasting, you're seriously abusing your body. And the reason for this is, of course, what major organ do we all need that is a muscle? It's the heart. And the body can't really distinguish when it activates the protein lysis, the lipolysis, lipidolysis, what am I talking about? Oh, anyway, the breaking down of protein, I've forgotten the term, that's embarrassing, isn't it? Protein lysis, anyway. The breaking down of proteins, it can't distinguish between the heart and the bicep. It will just break down all the muscles, essentially, in theory. And so the body will not do it, because it knows without the heart, it's dead. So it won't be doing it. But remember, guys, if you're getting that wasted look on your biceps and stuff, because you're not eating enough protein and you're dieting so heavily, just think of what it's doing to your heart. You will kill yourself eventually, or you'll do some serious harm. So guys, you need to make sure you're eating enough protein. It is actually better to eat too much protein than too little, because obviously that's you're not going to be doing too much harm. You're just going to be putting a bit of fat on. And protein, to be honest, has very small amounts of energy in it. So you're not going to create. You'd have to eat a huge amount of protein to create a large amount of fat. It gets downgraded. It's not like sugar, which has quite, every 3 grams of sugar you eat, that's too much for your body. You're going to be creating 1 gram of fat. Protein's got far less of energy. You'd have to eat like 100 grams of protein to create a couple of grams of fat, or whatever it is, the conversion rate. It's a lot smaller. There's not much energy in protein, but there's some, and the body will use it if you're eating excessive amounts. But protein is very important. It makes up our muscles, and if we don't eat enough, our physical structures, our skeleton, our muscles, everything, our organs, will start breaking down. So protein is important, guys. So the moral of the story is, is when you're dieting, you need to have a balanced diet. You need a little bit of everything, Okay, carbohydrates and fat are seen as the bad guys, and to be honest, if you're trying to lose weight, yes, you want to decrease these down to just beneath what what your body uses to maintain itself, and that way the body will switch to burning off fat instead of using your dietary sources of nutrition. But at the same time, you still need enough to remain healthy. So dieting is always better done slowly and methodically. Something that can be maintained over a long period of time. It's a healthier weight loss, and it's healthier for you, and it's more long term. Remember, in biology, the slower something happens, the slower it takes to be replaced. So if you lose fat slowly, typically it's going to be harder for the body to gain it back. Okay, in theory. Whereas if you lose, we all see people yo-yoing. They lose fat quickly, they gain fat quickly. It's basic biology, guys. Okay, and there are actually metabolic processes behind that. Okay, you essentially shock the body, so then it starts going into overdrive into trying to replace what's being lost. Okay. So I hope that helps. It's the basics. It's taken over 20 minutes. I thought it was only take 5 minutes. So I do apologise if this has been a bit too long, guys. I've got vitamin videos done already. I might release them a lot later, actually, because I want to go into details on specifically carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, or water. All the whole things. But I hope you enjoyed this video and you found it informative. Thank you.